Right now, somewhere in your city, a number exists that determines whether you eat at a restaurant tonight or stay home, whether you book the flight or don't, whether you say yes or no to your friends when they suggest a trip. You know that number by heart. You check it more than you check the time. It sits behind a screen, invisible to everyone around you. And that invisibility, that total seamless concealment of your financial position from the people you interact with every day, feels completely normal to you. It isn't. For approximately 99% of human history, every person who knew you also knew, with rough accuracy, exactly how much you had. Not because they were nosy, because it was physically impossible to hide. This script will change how you understand wealth, status, and why modern humans feel a specific kind of loneliness that our ancestors never experienced, and never could have. In 1991, archaeologists excavating a burial site near the village of Varna, Bulgaria, made a discovery that reframed what we thought we knew about prehistoric society. The site dated to approximately 4,600 BCE. Inside one grave, belonging to a single adult male, they found 990 individual gold objects. More gold, in a single tomb, than had been discovered across the entire rest of the ancient world up to that point combined. The Varna burial tells us something critical. Not just that wealth inequality existed 6,600 years ago, it tells us that whoever this man was, everyone around him knew. The gold wasn't stored in an account. It wasn't abstracted into a number. It was worn, displayed, carried, buried with the body, so that even in death, the signal continued. For most of human prehistory, your wealth was your body, what you wore, what you ate, how much your frame showed signs of consistent nutrition. In forager societies, researchers estimate that accumulated material surplus rarely exceeded what a person could physically carry, which was, on average, between 11 and 33 pounds of possessions. There was no abstraction. There was no number behind a screen. There was only what people could see. In 1992, a British anthropologist named Robin Dunbar published research suggesting that the human neocortex evolved to manage social groups of approximately 150 people. This figure, now called Dunbar's number, has been tested across hunter-gatherer societies, Neolithic villages, Roman military units, and 21st-century company rosters. It holds with remarkable consistency. 150 people. That was the cognitive ceiling of your social world for most of human existence. In a group that size, financial privacy wasn't a concept. It was an impossibility. If your neighbor's family had a bad hunting season, you saw it in their faces within weeks. If someone accumulated 3 times the grain of everyone else, every person in the settlement watched it happen in real time, over months, in daylight. Anthropologist Christopher Boehm spent decades studying forager societies across 4 continents. In his 2011 book, Hierarchy in the Forest, he documented a near-universal behavioral pattern he called reverse dominance hierarchy. When any individual in a band began accumulating disproportionate resources, the rest of the group responded, not with admiration, but with systematic social pressure, teasing, gossip, refusal to cooperate. In extreme cases, ostracism. The San people of the Kalahari have a specific practice for this. When a hunter returns with an unusually large kill, something that might elevate his status, the rest of the community gathers and insults the meat. They criticize it. They call it thin, poor, barely adequate. The hunter is expected to agree. This practice has a name in the anthropological literature, insulting the meat. It isn't cruelty. It's a 200,000-year-old technology for preventing dangerous wealth concentration in a world where everyone could see everything. Except there was a problem. The problem was scale. Around 10,000 BCE, in the river valleys of what is now southeastern Turkey and northern Syria, human groups began doing something they had never consistently done before. They stayed, they planted, they stored. The transition from foraging to agriculture didn't happen overnight. It unfolded across roughly 3,000 years. But its consequences for financial visibility were immediate and irreversible. Storage made hiding possible. A hunter-gatherer surplus spoils. Meat rots. Berries ferment. There is a hard biological ceiling on how much any individual can accumulate before the accumulation destroys itself. But grain doesn't rot for months. Livestock multiplies. Land, the most important invention of the agricultural revolution, could be owned without being carried. For the first time in human history, wealth could exist somewhere other than on your body or in your hands. It could be behind a wall, inside a granary, beneath the floor of a house, and a group of 150 people, with their finely tuned social radar built for the savannah, had no evolved mechanism for detecting it. In 1929, a German archaeologist named Julius Jordan excavated a temple complex in the ancient Sumerian city of Uruk, in what is now southern Iraq. Among the ruins, his team found small clay tablets, thousands of them, dated to approximately 3100 BCE. They were the oldest written documents ever discovered. They were not poetry. They were not prayers. They were not records of kings. They were receipts. The tablets recorded quantities of grain and livestock flowing in and out of the temple storehouse. They used a system of abstract marks, the world's first writing, to represent numbers and commodities. The very first thing human beings chose to write down was who had what. This is not a coincidence. Writing wasn't invented to preserve stories. It was invented because human memory, perfectly adequate for tracking 150 people's possessions in a forager band, was catastrophically insufficient for tracking wealth in a city of 50,000. By 2000 BCE, the city of Ur, also in modern Iraq, had a population estimated at 65,000 people. At that scale, the Dunbar system collapses entirely. You couldn't know your neighbor's financial position from watching them. You couldn't see their granary. You couldn't observe their herd. Wealth had become, for the first time, partially invisible, but only partially. In ancient Rome, a city that by 100 CE held approximately 1 million residents, financial status was still largely performed through the body and the built environment. But now the performance had to be louder, because the audience was strangers. Roman sumptuary laws, first introduced in 215 BCE under the Lex Oppia, attempted to regulate what citizens could wear and display based on their social class. Senators wore a broad purple stripe on their togas. Knights wore a narrow one. The width of a fabric stripe communicated your net worth to every person you passed on the street. In ancient China, the Tang dynasty codified color as economic data. Yellow was reserved exclusively for the emperor, purple for senior officials, red for mid-ranking bureaucrats. Common citizens wore undyed fabric. To look at a stranger in a Tang dynasty street market was to receive an immediate, legally enforced financial summary. The medieval European guild system operated similarly. A master craftsman's workshop frontage, his apprentices, his sign, all were regulated and visible signals of his economic tier. In 14th century Florence, a city of roughly 90,000 people, the catasto, a detailed wealth census, was conducted in 1427. Florentine officials went door to door recording assets, debts, and dependents for every household. The results were posted publicly. Your neighbors didn't just suspect what you were worth, they could read it on a wall. For roughly 10,000 years, from the first agricultural settlements to the early modern period, wealth had been becoming more abstract. More hideable, but it was still, in the end, tethered to things. Land, buildings, cloth, animals, objects that existed in physical space and could, with effort, be observed. Then, in 1602, something happened in a trading hall in Amsterdam that would sever that tether completely. On March 20th, 1602, the Dutch East India Company, known by its Dutch initials, the VOC, became the first company in human history to issue shares of stock to the general public. For the first time, wealth could exist as a claim on future value. Not grain, not land, not livestock. A piece of paper representing a fraction of ships that hadn't yet returned from voyages, that hadn't yet happened. The Amsterdam Stock Exchange, established the same year, was the world's first. By 1650, shares in the VOC were being bought and sold by merchants, widows, craftsmen, and clergymen across the Dutch Republic. Wealth had become not just hideable, it had become conceptual. You could now be worth a fortune and show nothing, carry nothing, wear nothing that revealed it, stand next to a man in identical clothing and be 10,000 times wealthier than him, with no mechanism, biological, social, or legal, by which he could detect it. The 200,000-year-old radar was blind. The modern bank account as we recognize it, a private numbered ledger maintained by an institution, inaccessible to anyone without authorization, became standardized across Europe between the 17th and 19th centuries. The Swiss Banking Act of 1934 formalized what many institutions already practiced, that a client's financial information was legally protected from disclosure, including to governments. By the mid-20th century, financial privacy wasn't just possible, it was a legal right. In 2023, the global consulting firm Capgemini estimated that there were approximately 22.8 million high-net-worth individuals worldwide, people with investable assets exceeding $1 million. The vast majority of them are entirely unidentifiable by appearance. They ride the same subway cars as people with $43 in their accounts. They stand in the same grocery lines. They wear unremarkable clothes. This is historically unprecedented. Not for decades, not for centuries, for the entire span of human existence prior to roughly 400 years ago, a period covering at minimum 200,000 years, this was a physical impossibility. In 2019, psychologists Jolanda Jetton and Noah Shayo published research examining how financial invisibility affects social behavior in modern societies. Their findings were specific. When people cannot accurately assess the financial position of those around them, they default to upward comparison. They assume, systematically, that others are doing better than they are. This isn't irrational. It's a miscalibrated version of a system that worked perfectly for 200,000 years. A status detection system now operating in an environment it was never built for. In 2022, a study published in the journal Psychological Science found that Americans across all income brackets consistently underestimated how many people earned less than them and overestimated how many earned more. The median American believed they were in roughly the 55th income percentile. The statistical reality placed most respondents significantly lower. The gap between perceived and actual position held across education levels, age groups, and geographic regions. The ancient mechanism that once protected communities from dangerous inequality, the one that made the sand hunters insult their own meat, the one that made Florentines post wealth records on public walls, is now running on empty. It is scanning a landscape of strangers whose financial reality it cannot read, and so it fills the gap with assumption. The assumption is almost always wrong, and it is almost always worse than the truth. Robin Dunbar's 150-person social world still exists inside your skull. The neural architecture built for a world of visible, trackable, communal resource sharing is the same architecture you are using right now to navigate a civilization of 8 billion strangers, abstracted numbers, and legally protected financial secrecy. When you feel the specific anxiety of not knowing where you stand, not knowing if you're behind, or falling, or invisible in a way that matters, you are not experiencing a personal failure. You are experiencing the precise collision between a 200,000-year-old social brain and a 400-year-old financial system. Your ancestors would have known, within a season, where every person in their world stood. They would have known without asking, without checking, without the number behind the screen. You will never have that, and neither will anyone looking at you.